What follows is the second part of the interview we had with Mr. Horowitz. We had over 50 people in the crowd, and the questions from the crowd were so amazing that I chose to make this a second part, completely separate. So I hope you enjoy this. Please like us, subscribe. If you have a listing, sell, or condo or a home or any real estate, please give us a call. And I hope you get inspired and make a positive change in the world.
I got a question. I got one in the back already.
Thank you. So, one of the most significant challenges I think that exists in this community and in other countries is the rising cost of Jewish education.
I hear you.
The rising cost of Jewish education.
Correct.
High school it's huge, as you well know. What are your thoughts on that problem, cost of possible solutions? Because it does affect, in a way, discharge for those that are towards the right, if they cannot afford Jewish education for the kids.
You're absolutely right.
Small technical thing.
Okay.
The microphone doesn't pick it up. So if you don't mind, the question was...
The question was how you deal with the rise cost of Jewish education. It is a tremendous problem, but you have to understand the source of the problem. It's been a problem for several thousand years, but the Jewish people had a solution. And the solution was that the rich people in the community took responsibility. The Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah talks about a community that doesn't provide a full Jewish education for all of their children, men and women. And he says that community is banned. You don't do business with them. You don't let your kids marry them. You don't count them for a minion. I mean, this is how horrific it was. Let's take the state of California. State of California has over 1 million Jews. Just out of curiosity, I went through the Forbes 400 2 or 3 years ago. The 10 wealthiest Jews in the state of California worth $80 billion. $80 billion. As far as I know, none of them are particularly Jewishly connected. But it is clear, you can do the numbers any way you want, the Jewish community, the wealthy of the Jewish community always provided a free Jewish education for any child that needed it. Till about 1650, the system started to break down after the Khmelnytsky massacres. Even then it worked pretty well. The money's there. The money's there. The Jewish community started breaking down in 1650. It's basically been somewhat downhill since then. So now we're left to practicality. Okay, the guys with the $80 billion aren't throwing any money into the pot. So the answer is 2 things. Number one, I remember back when we first put our kids in a Jewish day school. Gave the rabbi 10 checks, and there were times I had to call and just say, you can't cash the check. And the hardest job, my boys went to Hillel Hebrew Academy. We were not observant at that point, but Hillel took non-observant students. The hardest job I've ever had in charity was Rabbi Gottesman, who was then running the school, recruited me to be part of a 2-person scholarship committee. And people would come to us for scholarships. And it was heartbreaking. I remember there was one woman, and she lived in a studio apartment with her 2 kids, and she worked in a restaurant for minimum wage, and it wasn't a restaurant where you got tips. And her husband was sort of an electrician who occasionally got work and could throw some money into the pot. And we were talking about an equivalent of a $15,000 education. The thing that was heartbreaking was that there were never enough scholarship dollars to cover everyone. And as a result, what you have today is you go down to, it's a school down a little east of Robertson. It's Canfield School. You see a lot of kids there with yarmulkes. A lot of kids from Orthodox families. And the kids from Orthodox families are basically there for 2 reasons. Number one, a certain number of them need special education, which the Jewish community is not capable of sufficiently providing. But the majority of them, the parents just feel they just cannot afford a Jewish education. There are some creative solutions being worked on, some in this town, some back east, doing more with computers, and hopefully we'll come up with a solution. But it is a legitimate problem. And for some of the people who choose not to get the Jewish education for their children, it's a misallocation of resources. Their vacation to Hawaii is more important. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. A lot of the people are straining and struggling, and there's just no way, given the cost of the education, given the limited number of dollars available for scholarships, there's no way they can stretch what they can make into paying what's necessary.
Any other questions?
You'd said earlier that there were 2 years when you were running your business that you actually lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have made sense to close? What kept you going at that point?
Well, again, I'm in sales. Oh, the question is, 2 years, actually 1 year I lost a lot of money, the other I just about broke even. But the question is, wouldn't it make sense to close the business? And you have to understand something about salesmen. This applies to probably 98% of all salesmen. To be a successful salesman, you have to live in sort of a twilight zone between reality and fantasy. The fantasy is necessary because you make 100 phone calls to get a listing, 200 phone calls to make a listing, make 25 phone calls, all this rejection, to make one sale. It may not even be a big sale. And that means if you're making 1 out of 25, there are times you make 4 out of 25, there are times you make 1 out of 100. So you have to keep telling yourself a lot of stupid things a salesman tell himself, like every no is closer to the next yes, which is ridiculous. Every no is random.
Yeah.
So an optimist, I made money for years, and I just figured things would turn around. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the reality part is, if you're totally in fantasy, I don't know if any of you have seen the play Death of a Salesman. Salesmen love that play. What they love about that play is, the main character he's living in a fantasy world. But it's apparent from the context of the play that he was a top salesman for his company for many, many years. He just slipped into the full fantasy realm. So you have to be optimistic to start off to be a salesman. And you have ups and downs. The other thing about being a salesman is you can turn it around like that. There was another year where I either lost money or broke even the first 9 months, and then I ran into a family who just bought an enormous amount of insurance, and I had one of my best years ever, but I made 100 or 105% of the profit in the last 3 months of the year. So you always have that ability. If you're an attorney and you're on your own and you're sitting in an office and no one's calling and all year long, and maybe you ought to try something else. But if you're a salesman and you're dealing in a market where you can make substantial commissions, then you're always functioning on the hope that'll come through. Question.
You said you didn't begin as an observant Jew. What made that transition happen for you, and why Aish, or did you find Aish? Did Aish find you? How did that?
So that's a much longer story. Essentially, I would say more than anything else, we sort of had a rooting interest in the Jewish people. I was raised in a Jewish environment. There was one non-Jewish uncle in the family. Everyone else was Jewish. My parents' friends were all Jewish. My friends were all Jewish. And I could see that the Jewish people were starting to fall apart. And both my sisters intermarried. I have, they have two sisters. One of my sisters has an adopted child, not Jewish, no interest. The other one is 2 kids who are church-going. My nephew married a non-Jewish girl, so the kids aren't Jewish. So my wife and I determined that we were basically third-generation illiterates on both sides of the family. There had not been a Jew who had been able to make a free will decision since my great-grandparents. My grandparents were all raised observant, but they were raised sort of what might be called orthopractic. They And they came to America, they gave it up for whatever reason. And we just decided at some point the literacy had to start somewhere. So we put them in Hillel Hebrew Academy. And in terms of Aish, I actually found Aish. I actually went to Israel and sought them out. There was a population study that was done for the bicentennial in America, 1976. And they projected how many Jews would be in America in 2076, assuming no immigration into the country, no immigration out. And their highest number was 940,000, down from 6 million. Their most probable number was 420,000, and their worst case was under 100,000. I love numbers, so I don't trust anyone else's numbers. So I tracked the person down, did this study, and it was a very well done study. What he did was he took the average age of the Jewish population in America, which at that time was similar to Denmark, Sweden, and East Germany. He applied average family size to that number, and he had 3 different projections on intermarriage. At that time, intermarriage was 15%. The 920,000 was intermarriage go up 20, 30, 40, 50. The 420,000 was it would go 20 to 50 faster, and under 100,000 go to 50 immediately. What the study missed, because it didn't exist at the time, is it missed, number one, the Baal Tshuva movement, and the fact that there was a subgroup within the study. The Orthodox at that point were a very small number of the population, probably 4 to 5% of the population that was having children were Orthodox, so he missed that. But he basically had it right. So I was concerned. So I decided to look for an organization that I felt understood the problem and was prepared to do something about it. Over a period of 18 months, it's a much longer story, checked out a lot of places and met with Rabbi Weinberg in Jerusalem, came back to Jerusalem, met with him again, supporters, people, and decided this was the most effective educational organization in the Jewish world. And by the way, I wasn't just looking Orthodox because we weren't observant at the time. But it was the most effective educational organization in the world, and I signed on. And I've been with them ever since. Question?
What would you say to a young person that asks you, why should I marry Jewish?
Repeat the question, please.
The question is, why should I marry Jewish? The first thing I would do is I would refer them to a book cleverly entitled Why Marry Jewish? Written by a friend of mine, their own corporate. I do very little in terms of sponsoring books, but I partially sponsored that book, and it deals with the question in a lot more detail than I could now. I do tell people the divorce rate in Southern California is approximately 65%. There are 5 primary determinants of divorce. If you eliminate the 5 primary determinants of divorce, the divorce rate of those people left is about 10%. What are the 5 primary determinants? Number 1, Jew, non-Jew. 80% divorce rate. Number 2, 20-year age difference. Number 3, living together before marriage. Number 4, Catholic, Protestant, Protestant, Catholic. Number 5, 2 people of the same religion at substantially different levels of practice. So the first thing I tell them is, first of all, read the book. But second of all, and by the way, the book is very well written. It's for both the Jewish and non-Jewish partner. It is not anyone's better, anyone's worse. It's just saying there are real differences going on here. And you should recognize them. And the second thing is that it's a recipe for disaster. 80% divorce rate. The worst part of it is, and I've seen it, and probably all had some experience seeing it, is most divorces are not particularly friendly, and most divorced people don't particularly like their ex-spouse. And most divorced people end up fighting about a lot of things. And there is nothing as significant or heavy as fighting about is how the kids are going to practice religiously. So all divorces are problematical. You know, there's a number of books written, The Case Against Divorce. Divorce just wipes kids out. But now you got wiped kids out with parents of different religions who are basically telling them that their religion is true, the other religion is not true. I don't care what it is. You know, in the book, Why Marry Jewish, there's a woman who was Greek Orthodox who married a man who was Roman Catholic and promised to raise kids Roman Catholic. I don't really understand the difference. I know there are some differences, but they're pretty minor, in my opinion. But talks about how she cries herself to sleep every night. She betrayed 1,500 years of her family's history. And that's two Christian religions, and they're both on the Catholic side. So it's a kavakoma. You just imagine what it is when it's a Jew and a non-Jew. I have a friend who married a convert, and after the divorce, she unconverted and became a very strong evangelical Christian. It didn't do a lot for the kids. So A, you're maximizing your chance for divorce and unhappiness. B, even if the marriage sticks together, there are issues, that make it much tougher. And C, if you do get divorced, you're potentially wiping out your kids. Questions? Yes.
When I went to Israel, I go to Israel every few years. I have many cousins from my father's side there. We Persian mostly, I think in Iran, we practice the religion the same. We're conservatives, and here the same. So that's why if you go to a Persian synagogue, it's full every Saturday. Or other reasons, I don't know. But to me, I think that was a success for us. But when I go to Israel, and I have a big family from my father's side, and I have many, many cousins, except 2 or 3 who have become Orthodox. Most of them, they grew up there, except the few that grew up in Iran. They went there. They're like me.
Right.
The rest of them, 2 of them became Orthodox. The rest are not practicing at all, because in their mind and what they've learned.
Can I ask you to formulate the question?
No, she's getting there.
I'm getting there, because they think you either have to be Orthodox or you don't practice anything. So I saw that with many of their friends as well. Do you see that as an issue and a problem for Israel?
So there are two things.
Repeat the question.
The question is that in Israel, among her relatives in the Persian community, people have a feeling that it's all or nothing. And it's different from here, because in America you have Persians who are traditional, they're in the middle, they're at Sinai Temple, they're Stephen S. Wise, they're in shul every Saturday, have Friday night dinners. So there's 2 separate questions. The first question is, I'm going to address first the American Jews. You're my grandparents' generation. You were headed for disaster. And those Iranian Jews in Sinai Temple and Stephen S. Wise will not have Jewish descendants. They're running off a cliff. The difference is, you look at this first generation, second, third, and fourth, your generation 0. My grandparents were generation 0. And their kids weren't even generation 1, because very low intermarriage rate. The only difference between the Persian community and the Eastern European community, 1882 to 1922, is it took 4 generations to wipe out the Eastern Europeans. It's only going to take 3 generations to wipe out your descendants. And the reason is that at that time and place, there was tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in America. Tremendous amount. And, Jews you went into an Irish neighborhood on the wrong day, or an Italian neighborhood, you can get beat up. The Jews wanted no part of the non-Jews, non-Jews wanted no part of the Jews. The Jews were mostly working people. New York, they worked in the garment district. It was a big thing in my grandparents' generation when their kids graduated high school and got a job as a secretary. I mean, I think of my aunts and uncles. I just think of this now. There's only one who went to college. But a high school diploma, that was a big level. So you had the separation. So basically it took them 4 generations to be at the point where my 2 sisters, 8 cousins, 2 Jewish grandchildren. Should be 40. It's 2. You're coming into the country at a time when Jews are accepted, Jews are wealthy, Jews have a position, Jews are respected. And the proof is that in the younger generation now, you're already at 10 to 15% into marriage. And you're only a generation and a half into the cycle. So the good news is you can look at charts like this. You can look at what happened, not just to Eastern Europeans, but the German Jews 1815 to 1860, the original Sephardi Jews 1750 to 1800, the Holocaust survivors late 40s, early 50s, and you can see where you're headed. My grandparents, my parents, had no clue where they were headed. They didn't know they headed to disaster. And the German Jews were basically gone, and they were very different anyway. So that's the first thing. In Israel, there are a number of differences. The first difference is that although the rate of Jewish women marrying Arab men is growing very quickly, it's still a very low base and a very low number. So whereas in a generation or two, your descendants are going to be either observant or at the 70-75% intermarriage rate, in Israel, now a generation or two, they're going to be at a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% intermarriage rate. So A, they're going to marry Jewish. Number 2, in Israel, people still have families. Israel is the only developed country in the world, throughout the whole world. England, France, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, that has a rising birth rate. The only country in the world, the only Western country in the world, the only advanced country in the world. In Japan, Japan now sells more adult diapers than baby diapers. And every year they have more deaths than births. Israel's the exception. So in Israel, the non-observant who marry someone non-observant, they all have 2 or 3 kids. So A, they're going to marry Jewish, B, they're going to have kids. In terms of the all or nothing, it's an unfortunate development in Israeli society. We believe very clearly every mitzvah stands by itself. You do nothing but light Shabbos candles. You have a non-kosher dinner. You go out to a party. You watch TV. Hey, you lit Shabbos candles. That's a big mitzvah. That's a big mitzvah. You have a Friday night dinner with the family. That's a big mitzvah. You know, a lot of Sephardim in Israel, they go to shul in the morning and they go to soccer games in the afternoon. Shul in the morning is a big mitzvah. But in Israel, because it's so close and so small and so pressurized, that there is a feeling that either it's all or nothing, it's 100% or nothing. And unfortunately, it's reinforced by sort of both sides of the divide. It's a mistake, but a large number of very observant Jews in Israel look down on those who are not fully observant. And a lot of Jews who are not observant at all look down on those who they consider to be religious fanatics. It's a problem. There's people working on it, but it's a problem. And it gets also more complex in Israel, since it's also about politics and money and the direction of the country. The fact that I am observant, someone in LA who is a secular Jew is not worried that they will not be able to drive on Shabbos next year because I'm observant. Come on, we're 7% of the population of Southern California. It has nothing to do with you. But the decisions in Israel are much more impactful. And the Orthodox Jews in Haifa have to put up with the fact that there's public transportation. And the secular Jews and Jews have to put up with that there's no public transportation. And in Tel Aviv, they're fighting over it. Everything's a fight. It's all Jews. I could do one more question. Go ahead.
Hi. I grew up near Syracuse. Can you describe a little bit your journey from Hartford to Los Angeles? Weather or what?
Yeah, I turned 20 when I found out their places didn't snow in the winter. And I was going to the University of Connecticut. And I had always been hustling and making money, and I was up there in Stores, Connecticut, making the minimum wage, trying to work my way through college. So I looked at a couple of places. I ended up going to Las Vegas, where you could work sort of swing shift, 8 at night to 4 in the morning, and go to college. And I went from Las Vegas to business deal back to Hartford, to England for a business deal, out to Los Angeles. And I've been here since 1969.